Okay, so today we're going to talk about creating the budget. So this is an extension, is kind of a review a little bit of the lawmaking process because it's very similar to that. There are some differences, but it also is going to be much more involved with the executive branch. It's the reason I include it when we talk the executive branch and before we talk the bureaucracy. It kind of seems to bridge the two between the two of those very easily. All right, so now we are going to learn how the federal government creates their budget for the year. So this person, the goal is for this person on your screen here. This would be the president, and these people representing Congress to work together to create a federal budget for the country. Both sides have to work together because both sides, both parts are involved in this process, and they've got to sign off on it. Like, you cannot, the president can't create a budget using the executive order, and Congress can't, get around the president's input on the budget. So step one in this process, and you should have this form to fill in, and I would highly recommend, especially if you're filling this out on paper, is to not only put what I write in each one of these spots, but add additional information out to the side. Really flesh out each step here. So the first step is the president's proposal, which means that it takes over a year for the budget to be created. Right? The president is working from the moment he submits his proposal, because that's kind of what he has to do, is submit his proposal for the budget. Immediately his administration is going to start working on the next budget and planning and starting to gather the data they need for the next budget. So the president and his team at the Office of Management and Budget, also known as the OMB, it is an executive agency within the bureaucratic agencies, but they work with the president to develop a budget, a proposal for a budget. And essentially what this is a wish list of all the government agencies. Like, what do they want? So the first thing is they send to the OMB a wish list of everything that they want, and then the OMB along with the president take those wish lists and kind of whittle it down to what's a little more reasonable. And of course, if there's any kind of pet project or policy goal of the president, then they're going to focus on trying to get those things funded, and they're going to choose numbers that tend to be favorable to getting those things funded. So typically they're on the low end of the projections on money. So the budget proposal that the president has put together with OMB's help, who has used agency heads to give them wish lists, is the first Monday in February. And it includes the following things: spending priorities. So where does the president want to spend government money? Like, what is the focus? Plans for raising revenues through taxes. So how are they seeing? Are we talking a tax increase? Are we talking a tariff increase? What are we talking to raise revenue? Revenue is just money that we get. And then there's lots of documents supporting each item. So they give reasoning for why they are putting what they're putting, the numbers that they're picking. They supply that evidence to Congress, so they're supporting their argument. All right, so step two is going to be what's called the House Budget Resolution or the Senate Budget Resolution. So step two is budget resolutions. So the president proposes his budget. It goes to both the House and the Senate, and then they look at it, and then they come up with their own budget. They may use some of what the president has offered. Oftentimes the president is going off previous year's budgets and just tweaking them a little bit. That is what Congress will probably do similarly. But the House of Representatives is going to come up with a plan for the budget, and so is the Senate. Both of them are going to do this kind of separately. They are going to look at the president's budget. They're going to look at the previous year's budget, and they're going to look and say, what new programs or projects have we established in the previous year that now need to be funded? What projects are ending that no longer need to be funded. So they're looking at what all needs to be funded, what new things, what old things are, kind of what they refer to as sunsetting. So when they do this, the budget's going to include lots of details and contain tables. So they, this right here, this document right here is like, it's listing fiscal years and how much each general area of the government. So they are looking at how much did the Department of Defense get? How much did the Department of Ed get? How much did the State Department get? How much does the EPA got? How much over the years? So every single department. So they are looking at all of those areas, and they're looking at previous years and how much have they gone up by. They're looking at all of those things. Now these plans that they're putting together, and it's a plan. Here's the plan for the House and here's the plan for the Senate of where we think the money should go and in what chunks. But again, this is big money for the whole area of the government. So there are 12 areas that they're looking at. And so they're talking big numbers, like overall numbers. They're not breaking it down into line items yet, but they're getting there. So these plans that they're doing are called resolutions. A budget resolution is a document that lays out a rough budget. So we're going to spend X amount of dollars on defense. We're going to spend X amount of dollars on foreign policy. We're going to spend X amount of dollars on energy. We're going to spend X amount of dollars on the environment. So whatever it is. So from there, once they have this rough budget, then Congress will be able to go in and actually break down these numbers and say, here's what we're funding with all of this money, and do line items for every project that needs to be funded. Okay, so think about this as kind of the framework on the House. If the budget was a house, this is kind of the framework. Okay, so from there, the Senate has their budget resolution, the House has theirs. And of course, anytime there's two different versions, and there will be different versions, you've got to come together to put them together. So in this case, they're going to create that temporary conference committee. Members from both of the budget committees come together to work out their differences. Okay, and that's what this is talking about. We've got to put the House and the Senate together to create the budget. So we've got to create that temporary conference committee. Remember, conference committees are temporary. They are just ironing out the differences between the House version and the Senate version of whatever bill they're looking at. And in this case, the budget is a bill. Now, typically, the conference committee in the lawmaking process is occurring at the end. Like it's like the final step, the final thing they got to do before it either the bill finally dies, or it's going to the president. In this case, it's in the middle of the process. It's actually towards the beginning of the process. Really, it's in the beginning third of this process. So they've got to iron out their differences, and this is what they do here. So the House selected representatives from the House. Typically, it's going to be from the House Budget Committee and the Senate Budget Committee come together in this conference committee, and they're going to resolve those differences between the two houses. All right. The goal of this conference committee is to approve one final budget resolution, the framework for the budget. Okay, this is not the nitty-gritty details of how much is going to every single program that they are supposed to fund. It is big lots of money for the general areas of the government. Okay, so they iron out those details. Now, the House has to vote on this resolution, this conference committee resolution. That's always what they've got to do, because what they initially approved is not necessarily the same thing anymore. So the both sides have to vote on this new resolution, and then this is where it gets turned over to the appropriations committees. So once they have created this budget, now they are ready to tackle the actual creating of the budget. How much does every project get? So this job is made a little bit easier by dividing the spending on specific projects into categories. There are 12, and here they are. Here are the 12 categories that our federal government has been divided into, like all the money that goes to. So like notice down here, defense, they're their own area, but State Department and foreign aid is all together. Justice, commerce, science get wrapped together. Homeland Security gets their own, but education is in with Health and Human Services and labor. So notice labor is in a different category than commerce. Okay, so commerce is the business side, labor is the workers for the commerce. All right, so here's your 12 different categories that we are going to focus the budget on now that we have the framework. So essentially what we're doing in this appropriations committees, so in each one of these committees, their goal is to put up walls and, frame in the rest of the house. So the resolution, the budget committee created the framework. This is now going to put up all the various walls inside, so it's a solid structure. So each of these categories is given an appropriations subcommittee. So in the appropriations committee in the House and the Senate, these are why they're important, and such a powerful committee to be on. They are broken down. There's 12 subcommittees in each one for each area. So the Appropriations Subcommittee on Defense would decide to set aside $6.5 billion for researching and building a new type of fighter jet. This is what we're talking about on appropriations. It is that line item. Like, we're going to spend this much money on this project. Okay, that's an appropriation. So if we talk about spending, we're going to give $1 million to promote art in education. Well, then that would be an appropriation because we're designating a certain amount of money to a program. So the House and the Senate both split into these 12 smaller committees. So they are, you're in these committees, you're working. Each committee is going to develop a plan for spending money on smaller specific projects in its category. Okay, so all the 12 subcommittees in the House are coming up with a budget or an appropriations, and then the Senate is doing the same thing. Now, here's where it kind of changes in the lawmaking process, because notice the House has a version and the Senate has a version, and instead of them voting and then coming together, they don't vote on it. They just immediately, once each subcommittee gets their final draft together, then the subcommittees from both sides meet together to kind of iron out their differences. So this appropriations bill gets ironed out, the differences get ironed out before either side, full sides, vote on it, like on the floor. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. So each appropriation subcommittee on step 5 here is the committees are going to work together. They don't come up with their little budget and then go to the House floor or the Senate floor and have the whole Senate pass it and then work out their differences. They work out their differences before that ever happens. It helps in the process of getting things passed. Okay, but each one of these is going to be their own separate bill. So you have got defense as, is going to be its own budget, its own appropriations bill. Not budget, appropriations bill. Okay, so technically when we talk about the budget, there are 12 different bills that they're going to be dealing with and that the president will get unless they make it, they make some changes. All right, so they work together. Right? They're comparing their bills. They're looking at where they can make compromises, where they're different. And then finally, there's one final version in each bill. All right. So from there, the House then votes on this compromise of each appropriations, each of the 12 appropriations, and so does the Senate, because they've already ironed out their differences. Now, if each committee returns to its House of Congress and presents its appropriations bill, the House votes, the Senate votes, and if they both agree, then it goes to the president. That's the final step, which is always the final step in any lawmaking process. When approved by both houses of Congress, the bills head to the president. So here's our president back again. Finally, it's my turn. The president gets to decide if he will sign the appropriations bill or veto them. If he signs them, they become part of the final budget. We got our budget. Here we go. If he vetoes them, and if it's coming to him individually, he can veto various different parts of the overall budget because they're all separate bills. All of this has to happen by October 1st. If it doesn't happen by October 1st, the Congress can either pass what's called a continuing resolution, a CR, in which the government will keep operating on the previous year's budget, or the government shuts down. One of the two things happen if a budget does not get passed. Now, typically, I do want to put in here that So the budget has to go into effect on October 1st. Government agencies can only spend the money that has been appropriated for them by the final bills that were signed by the president. And most budgets do include some discretionary funding, so they have some leeway. They've got some money to kind of work with if, things come up, or certain projects may occur that they were not aware of, and they want to start funding it. So they can, have some money to kind of manipulate a little bit with goals. Now, oftentimes they are up against the deadline of October 1st. They've got to get it passed by 11:59 p.m. on September 30th. If they don't, technically the government will shut down. The concern is that they're always pushing that deadline. And so a lot of times what Congress will do is they will vote to make it an omnibus bill. They will put all 12 appropriations together into one large giant bill. The president then cannot go in and veto certain aspects because the president doesn't have a line item veto. All right. So when we're talking about this with the president, he signs it. It's got to go into effect, but oftentimes he doesn't get them as separate bills. It's one giant bill. Occasionally the defense bill gets put separately. That one typically is not as controversial as other aspects of the budget. There's not as much haggling over the military budget, the defense budget. And so sometimes that can get kind of done first. Occasionally they will try to do a 2-year budget, especially if you're talking year 2 is an election year. They don't want to be dealing with the budget or a potential shutdown in October with an election in November. So sometimes they're all like, well, let's just go ahead and knock out 2 years worth of budget. Most of the time that doesn't happen. It's usually a continuing resolution. Several times they get 6 months into the year and then they say, okay, well, let's just do a budget for the rest of this fiscal year, which is October to September, and then we'll go ahead and knock out the other next one too, just so they don't have to worry about election optics. All right, so that is all for today. If you have any questions, let me know. Have a fantastic day, and don't do anything too stupid.